So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the keynote speaker of the day, Dr. Liz Mestheneos. She's a UK-trained sociologist and a founding member of 50 Plus Hellas and past president of the H platform, which Ornaldos also mentioned. It's the EU-level organization representing some 140 plus associations and federations of older people throughout the EU. She also has a lot of experience on web and ICT accessibility specifically, including as evaluator for the EIII Awards and the Smart Accessibility Awards organized by the Voda Foundation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Liz.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I realise I'm talking at least in half to the converted. That is to say, people who already, I don't have to convert. They already know about accessibility. I don't know the rest of you. And so I'm going to talk to some of you as if it's an issue about pressure, about how you have to think about an ageing society of Europe. That by now Germany will be ageing a little less quickly than it was. I'd just say I'm going to do the advert for Age Platform to begin with. As you might expect, I'm here to represent older people. Let me just see. Right. Well, no, we got it. I didn't press hard enough, that's all. Right, I mean, it was formed in 2001. And it was brought together both European and national organisations. The idea was that Europe could not be just made up of those in the labour force and employers and the government, that it actually had to include an awful lot of other people who were not in those categories. And particularly, one of the largest categories is that of older people. And it's important because demographic ageing is universal. I call it a newish social phenomenon. I mean, in 1966, men could expect to live to 66 in England. Now they can expect to live to 80. It's a big change, I mean, in that short period of time. And I think people haven't yet, and that includes older people and younger people, grasped what it means to have a society that will be more and more made up of a considerable proportion of older people. So it's overall in the EU, the life expectancy is about 80. At 60, you can expect to live another 21 years. I put this data very roughly, it doesn't matter. There are, of course, variations by country, and there are variations by social class, by education, by gender, and more importantly, by state of health. About at least half of those years usually are lived in reasonable health, but the other half, people may not have good health. And one of the things that we're rather interested in is promoting healthy life expectancy and worrying about those people who don't have good health in their last years. And there, as Avramius mentioned, this is really important about the rights of people to be cared for and to be supported when they really need it because they don't have good health. And I'm going to come back to this issue, as you pulled up to, the human rights of older people and the very evident social exclusion of many. And I'm going to point out that the exclusion comes very evidently in the very large numbers not having access and not using the internet. And I know you might think this is a choice, but I hope to prove to you this is not really a choice. This is something that has happened to people. Oh, dear me. And let's start by saying that during my period, I've been using the computer since 1982, and I can't tell you the, yes, I know many of you weren't even born, but at least, yes, but I remain a simple-minded user. But boys, it got easier. And, you know, it's getting easier still. And we teach at 50 Plus Hellas, it's in Greece. We teach people computer skills, and we've gone away from teaching people keyboards to touch screens, to all sorts of other skills that they really need in using the internet. But we're still underway. I mean, I think there isn't anybody here who doesn't loathe passwords. Does everybody love passwords? But we have an issue of passwords and security not solved yet. The technology has not got up to it. It will do. We've got Siri voice activation coming. It's getting better. I mean, this activation. It's going to make a difference. But some aspects have definitely got easier. The wiring has got easier. The keyboard has got easier. There's things that I remember which were an absolute pain in the arse are really a lot easier than they were. But I want to say I remain not a digital native. I have and it's important I underline this. I have another strategy. When you ask me what does something mean, what is the origin of something, I will still go sometimes to a dictionary or an encyclopedia. I am gradually replacing this by behaviour which says, I'll look it up online. And I want to say that because it's really important to understand that older people are not stupid. They have well ingrained other habits. They actually know how to do it, or think they know how to do it, a different way. I think there's not many of you who haven't seen YouTube's funny stories of the monk being taught to use a book. Right? Scandinavian, I think it is. Well, look it up. It's a monk being taught to use a book. You must have seen the baby using a tablet, using a magazine and trying to use it as a tablet. The thing is that we learn in rather fixed ways. The psychology of us is we assume that what we do is the normal and best way of doing things. And this is difficult when you are dealing with a major social and intellectual change. And digital thinking is very different from all the other kinds of thinking we had before. As you will find out gradually in life, relearning is often far harder than learning. Replacing one kind of information with another is much harder. And so I want you to bear that in mind, because you're going to meet it in your own lives. And you've got to meet it when you talk to older people. Learning and change. Another problem that a lot of older people have, and I'll point this out shortly, is maintenance and support. When you go wrong, is there anybody here who's not had a problem with their computer, tablet or iPhone? Good, because it's not possible. Okay, it's just not possible not to have had a problem. What do you do? Well, I got friends actually, and I ask them. And I say, what do I do now? Oh, well, you switch it off. I mean, that, by the way, is one of the great solutions in life. Switch it off and start again. It's got its knickers in a twist, which is an English expression. But it's the truth. You switch it off and get it clean and start again. You even unplug it at times, as if the electricity would make a difference. But you do it. It does get into a mess. Think about an enormous number of older people whose social networks are limited or periodic. Many of them are living alone. They do not have somebody to ask. They don't even go to the cafe where they can even ask the next door person. If they were sensible, that's what they would do. They would go to a cafe full of young people and say, what do I do now? But they don't. Some of them because they physically can't. And some of them because they're kind of, oh, well, never mind. They give up. But it's important because when you design websites or anything in computer age, you've got to remember that you are often dealing with people who are quite isolated from support and don't have it. Yeah. And so if it's going to work, please let it work the first time and not the second and third time. And I'll come back to that. The costs, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment, it's still a barrier for many on low incomes. I have seen, and I'm delighted to say it, finally Wi-Fi becoming a facility at all hotels. And it's free, except to the very, very expensive hotels, which I don't normally go to. But I just want to say that's, in many areas, it's still something you pay for even on the street. In Greece, in my village, I can go, when I go in the summer, it's a free facility. So everybody goes and drinks coffee and gets free Wi-Fi. So it's really available if you can afford your coffee. Cost of failure, and this is the big one. Websites that don't operate easily fail people, and they act as a very strong disincentive to try again. In other words, if you didn't do it right, you give up. People can't see why they should be bothered with it. They're tired. They just can't be bothered. And this is actually not really a good thing. Why does it happen? Well, I'd first say, and we're going to go back to government websites, they're not testing them on older users. In fact, I think sometimes they're not actually testing them on users. They're not gathering evidence about where they fail. And that is, after all, possible. They often have helplines, and they should be gathering this data about where they're failing and where people don't understand them. It needs, of course, if you're a developer or a designer, it needs some resources, but not a huge number. We're not talking about intensive, huge numbers, but just go out and ask users from the very beginning to the very end how, and watch them, how they use a website. They don't all use it the same. Anymore, some people still use books, I guess, here. I still often read a book from back, I don't mean it from back to front, but I often go to a magazine starting at the back. A lot of people go to the middle. We don't read things the same way. We don't see the same things, and you've got to observe that when you are developing a website. Watch what people do, what people observe, what people understand from your website. So I would say there aren't typical older people. One of the things that I kind of have to deal with often is this assumption that one older person, age 65, will do to represent all older people. It doesn't work like that any more than it works like that with the population. There is a varied set of people and a varied set of understandings and skills out there. And I am not sure that it's always age-related. I actually think this is people-related. There's some pretty dumb people out there at the age of 20. Test on them too, right? Test users. How friendly is this site to users? Can they and do they understand it? Some people are wizards at understanding the brain of the developer. Most of us are not. Most of us really fail. I have failed on the British, because although I live in Greece, I have connection obviously with Britain. I even have to pay some tax there. It was beyond me. A friend, my American friend, is helping her British friends fill in the passport forms. She said, well, they can't deal with them. That's the national passport. You know, I'm sure Britain won't mind me telling them, because every time they try to do it, they get interrupted. The telephone goes and they lose all their input. They have to keep starting again. That's an infuriating thing in all websites where you have to fill things in online. Make sure that you don't keep losing your data, or that you can go back and correct it when you finally understand which bit they really wanted in that form. And this, again, is not an older person's problem. This is a problem of websites being poorly designed. The difference is that older people give up. The older people don't have advice, or they go to my friend who's a bit more savvy. She's just 80, but she's an old user in every sense of computers, and she's just got a bit more patience with websites. But an awful lot of people don't. I think unclear procedures, again, what am I supposed to do? What does it mean? If you haven't tested it, you don't know. Do not assume that people have any memory of ever using the site ever before. I think, again, there's an assumption, oh, you'll only go through the procedure once. No. I do things maybe once a year, once every 5 years. Remember, we fail. We don't remember. It's not important to us. Those who do web development, and it can be the web developers or it can be the government officials, it's really important to them. It's their job. Of course, how can you not understand? Well, it isn't very important to me, and it isn't very important to the rest of us. So you really need to encourage people to make it memorable, to make it easy, to make it redoable. And that, again, is not something for older people. It's just that older people will often give up because they're less patient with the failures of systems, perhaps. And I suppose that gets me back to the issue that you want, whatever you do, look at it that you want mainstream solutions. I am sure that people are talking after me about specific interests, specific accessibility issues. And of course, there are people of hard of hearing, have poor sight, can't sit along. There's a whole sort of conglomerate of accessibility issues. But I'm really trying to deal with the centre ground of people who perhaps can't get out of the house, are quite isolated, and have nobody to help them, or very few people to help them. And the people like me can't be bothered if it fails. If it fails, I am not going to try again. Now that's worrying. We are going to gradually see e-government and e-health services all being there for people. Can I point out that even the people who are sort of fairly savvy about it might miss the announcement that it's all going to be done on the web from now on. And this is really quite an issue, that you're going to be excluding people if you're not careful. And yet it's the very people you want to reach out to. The people stuck in their homes, the people who can't get out, the people who are most dependent. They're the ones who have most need of websites for all kinds of services, including government and public services. Now, usage, that reads as, it doesn't read USAID or USAID, it's usage. How do we use it? And I know David Sinclair's sitting here, and I hope he's not going to use the same data, but I'm warning him from now on. Everybody knows that data usage, internet usage, is going up every year, every month. And I found some data which was really quite helpful to me from EIII UK for September, I think it was, 2015. And I wanted to say, look, this is a country which has been using the internet longer than most. It's rich. It has a lot of facilities, lots of NGOs have been pushing for it, lots of training courses for many, many years. And look at the data about that, and then think of Romania, Hungary, if we must, in Greece, certainly. And you'll see how problematic it is about just switching and using websites by government and local government. We have a long way to go. Nearly 40% of 65 plus have never been online. Never. That's in Britain, and it's been training for the last 20 years. Oh, well, no, 1993, 4, whenever it was. Yeah, it's 20 years, isn't it? 20 years we've been around, and the internet's been around. 40% have still never been on anything. 40%, 2% use it daily, 14% weekly, versus 73% in all age groups. Just obviously huge variations by country, age, educational level. Non-usage. Very interesting data here. 53% are not interested. I would like very much, because I don't think they ask the question, sometimes we can't know, how many of those were once interested, tried it, and it failed them? I would be interested, because inside that not interested are the people who stopped using it. 32% a lack of skills. Now, that tells you something that governments can do something about to try and help people use it. They can train. Actually, they don't. There's very little training going on, or at least the volume and focused for older people. We do it, it's really valuable. We're still getting to a tiny percentage. 12% say the costs of equipment are too high. 11% saying access costs are too high. That's a difficult one. I mean, that's not their priority. It's eating or medicine that's their priority. You're going to have to think about that, about when government websites want to get to these people, often the most needy and the poor, how are you going to make the equipment and the access affordable? Tablets are beginning to revolutionise this. Tablets are available at 50 and 90 euros, and they work. It's changing. So when I say this data, you can expect this figure to change as we look at it almost. But it's still there as from data from the last few months. 1/3 of internet at home, age 65 to 74, but only 1/3 age 75 plus. Now again, that's worrying. This is exactly the group. If you don't have it at home, by the way, it's a hell of a bind to go out and try and use it. And yet this is the people who are often most in need. How are you going to get the accessible Wi-Fi to people in their homes? And a lot of them are the people who very much, the older they are, very often the lower the income. I mean, I talk in huge generalities. I have to. I'm talking for the European Union. Well, trying to. But I think, just get it about how we are going to deal, or how local government or regional government or national government are going to focus on these people aged 75 and onwards. Or in all countries, we have problems of mobility, people who can't get out of their house, can't get to places, of social isolation, and therefore some of the issues about getting people online are going to be there. People have to think about it. It could be an absolute boon to many of the most isolated. I remember reading a wonderful story, in fact it was from Hungary, about Malta. There's an organisation, people will correct me, it's an NGO, it has a Maltese sort of title, but they were putting computers or tablets into people very, very socially isolated, very poor people in rural areas who were very depressed. And they gave them a tablet, gave them an internet connection, gave them a bit of training. And they said it revolutionised their lives. They suddenly got out of bed and could start talking to people without having to physically get out of their homes or take a bus to go anywhere. We could say that this is a set of people who have utter priority, in a way, in needing. They need the internet and all the good things that it can bring. So, as I finish, the accessibility of the internet for older people, it's important for them to understand its relevance, so advertising to them is important. Get them to understand how easy it is to use, if it is easy. Please, when you do usability tests, recognise that websites are unfamiliar. Only do user tests and watch unfamiliar users, not somebody who already knows about it or the subject. Usability tests are done on people who don't know about it. Public websites are really valuable. We're going to use them to improve efficiency, accountability, transparency, and all those wonderful words used in public administrations and governments. But it only works if you actually make it available to everybody in your community. And this is where the advert, the final advert comes, I suppose you call it an advert, that Europe, in a way, has to push a little harder to local authorities, to regional authorities and to governments about what it is going to do to make sure that these websites are good enough, just good enough for older people. They are a more picky, a more difficult audience than you would believe. They have chosen sometimes not to use it, sometimes they've been excluded. In both cases, you've got to think about them. So that's why we talk about the directive. And finally, I go out with the motto, human rights. It's a bit odd to talk about the acts to me, to talk about access to the internet as a human right. And yet, I think if I deprived you of the right, or we hear about the Chinese or X, Y not being allowed to, oh, it's a human right. Well, at the moment, there is probably half the population of older people in Europe who are being deprived of their right to access the internet and all the rich evidence and material that it is on there, and some of it is essential for their lives and their well-being. Thank you.
Terrific, Liz. That was a great keynote address, and I like how you summed it up there in the middle, really. When you said it's not an older person's problem, it's a website problem. And I think, it's a nice illustration of web accessibility from older people's perspective, but really, this is the issue it boils down to.